Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Wednesday, 23rd of August 2023, Buffer North East Somerset Planning Committee. My name's Ian Halsall. I'm the Vice Chair of the committee. I'm here in view of the absence of Councillor Duncan Housel. So as we start, I'd just like to introduce, or ask the officers on the top table to introduce themselves. So starting on my right.
I'm Karina Haskins from Democratic Services.
Thank you. To my left.
I'm Chris Gom. I'm one of the team managers in Development Management.
And on my further left.
David Brown, Planning and Highway Solicitor.
Okay. So could I please ask everybody just to double check once again that they've turned off all their electrical devices, laptops, tablets, phones, etc. The meeting is being filmed. If anybody doesn't want to be filmed, particularly if you're speaking, if you want to have a word with Ian behind me, then he'll make sure that you're not broadcast. We are going out via the internet. We will be on YouTube. If anybody is speaking, please ensure you're using your microphone and switch on the button. This is the same equivalent as when you're on a Teams or Zoom call. You're on mute otherwise and no one will be able to hear you. Okay, I'd just like to ask Karina just to explain the emergency evacuation procedure.
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. From this room, you use the main door and then the main exit of the building. The assembly point is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the agenda items now. So item 2 is apologies for absence and substitutions.
Yes, we've got apologies from Councillors Duncan Hounsell and Toby Simon, and the substitutes are Councillor Fiona Gawley and Councillor Alex Beaumont.
Thank you. So I now ask members of the committee if they have got any interest that they wish to declare. No, that's a no from everybody. Thank you. Number 4, urgent business agreed by the Chair. I can just confirm there is no business to discuss, so we can move on now to item 5, which is for the Democratic Services Officer, just to explain the speaking procedure.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public and parish councillors have registered to speak about individual applications on the agenda. Ward councillors not on the committee have also indicated they wish to speak about applications. The speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation about the application. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as followed. Parish Town Council representatives will speak first and be allowed 3 minutes in total. Objectors to an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. Supporters of an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. If there is more than one objector or supporter of an application, they must share the 3 minutes allowed to each side. Ward councillors not on the committee who have indicated they wish to speak about an application may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. The speeches will be timed by the traffic light system you can see on the table next to me. At the start, the light will be green and will turn to amber when there is 1 minute of speaking time remaining. When the light turns red, speakers should immediately conclude their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we need to go back to the July 26th committee and the minutes of that meeting. Is everybody happy with those minutes and it's the correct record? So Paul, Councillor Crossley, you're putting that forward as a motion to support. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Warren. Okay, so do we take a vote on that? Do we all vote on that, sorry? Yeah, so we all vote in that it's a true record? Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, okay, we shall now move on to the planning applications. So first one is a deferred one from last month, which was in order to hold a site visit. This is application reference 220/03580/FUL. It's the former Welton Bibby and Barron factory at Station Road, Welton in Midsummer Norton. So I'd like to invite the case officer, Chris Griggs Trevarthen, to present his report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I launch into the presentation, there's a couple of updates, verbal updates, just to provide the committee with. Firstly, members will note the report has been updated. The committee report has been updated since you've seen it from last month. I just wanted to quickly summarise the changes that had been made to the report. So firstly, the application has been screened for EIA, confirming that it's not EIA development. Conditions 3, relating to the requirement to enter into a highways agreement to secure the highways and pedestrian improvements on Station Road, and condition 6, which relates to a contract being in place for the rebuild of the brewery facade, have been deleted from the recommendation and moved into the heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement, as officers felt that was more enforceable. The heritage section has also been restructured just to clarify the impacts on the various different heritage assets and to add some further information about the significance of the brewery building. The planning balance has had consequential amendments as a result of that, just to help clarify matters. And the recommendation has been amended from a permit to delegate to permit to enable officers to enter into that Section 106 agreement. I've also, in the last 24 or 48 hours, received petitions in support of the application. This has come to me in 3 different files, one containing 132 names, one containing 66 names, and one containing 20 names, for a total of 218 names. Although I would note on one of those petitions there was a comment against one of the names which said, "Keep it as it is, please." So I'm not sure they realised they were signing a support petition. But I just wanted to make that clear to members. So with all those updates in mind, I'll launch into the presentation, which most of you would have seen last month, but I know we have new members on the committee this month, so I will go through everything. So here we can see the existing site. It's the former Welton Bibby Bag Factory, just north of Midsummer Norton High Street, which is just to the south down here. We've got Station Road, which runs along the eastern side of the site, and you can see the red line boundary of the site just encompasses the Station Road just along the east here and goes around the whole of this wider site here as well. And as we move on, we can see an aerial photograph of the site, occupied by a significant number of industrial buildings, and those that were able to make the site visit would have been able to see the state and the condition of those buildings. There's not a huge amount of activity going on the site. It is no longer in use as a single business anymore, but there are a number of sort of meanwhile uses going on, I think warehousing and other things. We've got the Welton FC football club down here. We've got Welton Vale and the Midsummer Norton Conservation Area just to the east, the boundary of which runs up to and includes the facade of the brewery buildings, which are identified in this area here. I'll show you in a bit more detail, and then come around this building here and then follow the road down. Just another aerial photograph, this time from looking from the north, looking south towards the site. It's a bit of a dated photograph, but it just gives you an idea of the scale of the existing buildings on the site and the coverage of buildings. So the whole of this area outlined in purple here is part of a site allocation in the local plan partial update, SSV4, which requires a comprehensive mixed-use redevelopment comprising residential, commercial facilities, employment uses and a medium-scale retail use. Now, to be clear, this application is not for the wholesale redevelopment of the site. It is described as enabling works, and we'll come on to consider what that includes just shortly. So, part of the application involves demolition, and it would be demolition of this area here, labelled Phase 1. So it's all of these buildings here, which are sort of an assortment of connected buildings of various ages, holding the most historical significance being these 3 buildings at the front, the tallest buildings, which form part of the former brewery building on the site. And you can just see in purple here, that's the outline of the conservation area. And then just moving on to some photos. Again, those who've been on the site will recognise all of this, but this is from the Stones Cross roundabout. You can see the Stones Cross pub on the left, and then looking down Station Road there. And we'll travel down Station Road, so you can see some of the land to the rear of the Stones Cross. You can see the narrow pavement that runs along the east side of Station Road. And then coming to the southern access to the site, which we'll see on the plans in a minute, and this is the first sort of view you get of the end gable of one of the brewery buildings. And then moving further down, you can see there's no pavement on the west side of Station Road, and it's quite a tight pavement on the east side here, and you can see the imposing structure of the brewery buildings on the left. And then we're moving down to the northern access point for the site, looking back to the south, up the hill. You can see the brewery buildings there, and some of the more modern industrial buildings that make up the rest of the site. And there's just another view looking back that way. And then another view looking back southwards up Station Road, next to the facade of the brewery building. And then again looking south, but this time near the southern entrance to the site. You can see some of the terrace properties that form a positive contribution, make a positive contribution to the Midsummer Norton Conservation Area on the left there as well. This is, again, further to the north from the Norton Radstock Greenway, a sort of bridge that goes over Station Road. Looking back south, you can see I've highlighted the brewery buildings, which are quite an imposing structure in the local vicinity. And again, just from underneath that viewpoint, looking back that same direction. And then this is from the south, looking north of the site. You can see, again, the end gable of the brewery buildings. And from the east, inside the conservation area, this is Welton Vale sort of area. Again, this is just an image selected just to show the prominence of these buildings from in the local area. And just some historical photos for a bit of context. You can see, obviously, the site has been in factory use for a long time, and you can see the brewery buildings when they were in a little bit of better state than they are today, back there. There's some interior shots of the building. It was obviously an important building in terms of its Welton's contribution to the brewery industry, and there's a summary of its significance set out in the committee report in more detail. But these are internal shots from more recent times. And then, so moving on to the plans then. So once, other than the demolition, which is the first part of the proposal, the proposals include highways improvements and carriageway improvements along this section of Station Road. So that would consist of pavement widening, carriageway widening, an embankment, with a new retaining wall along, and rebuilding of the facade. I just want to be clear on this image. It does show sort of a pedestrian crossing and a public square adjacent to North Road, and some tree planting adjacent to Berkeley Avenue here. It's been confirmed these are illustrative on this plan, and they're not part of the proposal or part of the description. So these are not being sought planning permission, are shown for illustrative purposes only. But moving on to show in more detail what's proposed. So the eastern pavement would be widened to 1.8 metres. There'll be a new crossing put in here, just to the south of the northern entrance to the site. There'll be a new 2-metre wide pavement on the west side of Station Road, and Station Road itself would be the carriageway would be widened to 6 metres. Then there would be a low retaining wall put in place at the back edge of that pavement, with a grassed embankment behind, up to the level of the development platform that would be created at the back. And beyond that would be some new tree planting and the rebuilt facade of the brewery building. And then just moving further down, so that would continue down to the point of ownership here, which is just to the south of the southern entrance, before we get onto the sort of rear yard that sits at the back of the Stones Cross pub. And there would be another crossing, pedestrian crossing here. That would likely be a zebra crossing. Moving on to some elevations. So existing elevations at the top, you can see the existing brewery buildings here, and the modern industrial buildings as well. And you can see the proposals to step that back with a grass embankment, rebuild the facade up to a similar height, albeit slightly lower, incorporating a number of the features that are currently in the facade there. and the tree planting that would sit behind the embankment. Just some sections quickly. So moving from south to north, existing section at the top here, proposed section here, so some of the modern buildings removed, and the embankment setting the wall back, new pavement opening up views of aspects of the conservation area. Section B, a little bit further up, similar situation, existing buildings removed. I think they've illustratively shown something here which would potentially come forward as part of the wider redevelopment, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then a section through the area where the facade would be rebuilt. If you note the facade sitting at the top of the embankment there, behind the widened pavement. And then just another section further up, again, looking the other way this time, so you can see the facade is shown on this side in this image. And then just briefly on the landscaping proposals, it's proposed to put in just a number of replacement trees along the site here to provide a sort of softer green edge to the development site. And they've given some details of the tree planting there. Just to be really clear, as I said before, this is an allocated site for a wider redevelopment. There has been previous planning permission granted for a wider redevelopment of the site that has now lapsed, and so there is no active planning permission in place for the redevelopment of this allocated site. This master plan, illustrative master plan, has been submitted with the application purely to demonstrate that the works that are proposed as part of this application, the enabling works, wouldn't prejudice the delivery of a master plan for the wider scheme or prejudice the delivery of the allocated site. So this plan here is not to be considered today. It's not something you need to turn your mind to particularly in terms of whether or any of this is acceptable, but merely its purpose is a piece of evidence to demonstrate that you could deliver a scheme that meets the allocation aspirations without being prejudiced by the proposals that are in front of you today. So the application is recommended for permission, subject to conditions in Section 106 agreement. I'm happy to take any questions after the speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. And it's not easy to say brewery so many times. Right, okay. So we do have a number of people who wish to speak in regard to this application. So first of all, I'd like to invite Councillor Mike Moxham from Midsomer Norton Town Council. Okay. Are you able to get to the microphone okay? Yeah. Okay, so you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Right, hi. I'm Councillor Mike Moxham, Midsomer Norton Council. I'm here representing the people of Midsomer Norton regarding this project. It's been going on for so many years. People just tell me it will never happen, it will never happen. Baines are holding it up, Baines are holding it up. But it's not all Baines, I know it's not. But reading this report from was it when referenced 10th to the 2nd, 2023, the case officer's recommendations were permit. And looking at the drawings that I've looked at, and being on the site visit with you all a couple of weeks ago, I mean, I think it's just plain and obvious that it needs to be done. It really needs to be done. Councillor Roberts behind me, they did a survey on the width of the roads down there. It's not sufficient for a road width. So let's try to get this improvement down here. The lower cottages down by the brewery, they haven't seen a summer sunset for years because it goes down behind the brewery building. And I think that the whole project down there, it is a bad end of the town. It's a disgusting end of the town. It needs to be brought up to standard and up together a little bit. I don't know what else to say really. I mean, it seems ludicrous that this isn't happening. The brewery is a very limited heritage value. I worked in there 40 years ago. Nobody was allowed in there then. I was a contracts manager for 40 years. And I know what the effect of heavy vehicles going by a building without so close proximity of a road. You've seen it around by Cheddar in the villages where the big heavy quarry lorries are driving down. The ground gets pudding. The foundations aren't on concrete, they're on stone. They will gradually sink. And then you get cracks in walls and it will happen. This has been happening all over the country. Here's an opportunity to get that danger out of the way, improve the area for people, and move on. There's a petition gone in. It's been arranged in short notice by lots of local volunteers. It shows their concerns for what they want. And I think that's what we ought to be listening to. What the people of Miston and Orton, and especially Well, want. They've got a wonderful greenway. Our council has already done Wellowbrook Walk, which I understand can be connected to the Welton site, because there always was a footpath down through there, which gives us access as well from that way. There's a pathway, that pathway coming in the top entrance will go around the back of the site and across by the dentist with a new footpath. There's so many old people go up there. I go up there every day. They have to get off the pavement if I come up. It's so narrow. Mothers and children with buggies, they have to get off the pavement. You saw that traffic that day at the meeting.
Okay, Councillor Boxham, thank you for your comments there. Could you just finish off?
Pardon?
Thank you. We're just about to finish. Could you finish your comments, please?
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I've gone on too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Councillor Moxham. Okay, so we have a speaker who wishes to object to the proposal. I have Miss Jane Lewis. If you'd like to come to the table, please. Okay, so again, you have 3 minutes to make your points.
Okay, I'm addressing you once again only about the brewery building and its need to be retained under policy. I have some bullet points to support this view, which I'll read, and I hope you'll note that I'm using planning arguments, not conjecture. Oh, sorry, I thought it was set up for recording. Okay, the widening of Station Road as part of enabling works is not a requirement for redeveloping the factory site as a whole. It does not feature in SSV4 or the 2018 Planning Commission, so why has it been included? Its apparent need has been cobbled together, in my view, ahead of any other higher priority local road project without proof, and the benefits claimed are not substantiated by before and after traffic and travel facts or evidence-based studies that might normally be expected from both sides in the circumstances of such an application. The brewery has strong protection within the development plan policies, undiluted by the recent local plan partial update. I consider their weight has been systematically underplayed against an overestimate of support for road widening based on subjective statements of need and benefit within the officer's recommendation report. Carbon emissions caused by demolition and rebuild are higher than those generated by retention and reuse. A single wall elevation is the worst of both worlds. Removal of a heritage asset and no functional building considered for reuse or replacement. If an application is considered as unacceptable because it includes demolition of a heritage asset, then doesn't a Section 106 agreement to secure delivery of a wider road not connected to the site, which in itself is prompting demolition of the brewery, does it actually facilitate the policy violation rather than mitigating it? This is the wrong way round, isn't it? I can't get my head around this. I don't support the view that upholding policy and retaining the brewery will make any measurable difference to delivery of the main scheme, given its history to date. The premature separation of these proposals under the guise of enabling works is in itself suspect, in my opinion. I can add that a precedent has been set recently. The Secretary of State overturned a planning inspector's decision so that Marks and Spencer can no longer demolish and replace its flagship building on Oxford Street. Despite no formal heritage status, it was considered important to keep. That's the Secretary of State. The pavement changes do not extend to Stones Cross, where the west pavement and road are narrowest. I'm adding this in because of the drawings, so I just found the whole lack of measurements of existing versus new in clear plan not helpful. The legality of the petition, which has also been raised, I question the legality of the petition. There's no wording, no notice. I thought there was a process with which it needed to be submitted to the Planning Committee.
Thank you very much for that. Okay. Right, so we have another speaker. We have Nigel Whitehead, who is speaking in favour of the application. Okay, thank you. Yeah, please, turn your microphone, thank you. Okay, as with other speakers, you've got 3 minutes to put your points across.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, for this opportunity to address you on behalf of the applicant. I wish to make several points about the application site, the new Baines site allocation policy, which will hopefully put into context what you experienced on your site visit. You will have now observed the existing road and footpath layout and the positioning of the frontage buildings in relation to the main entrance to this extensive redevelopment site. You will have witnessed the patterns and frequency of existing movements of pedestrians, cyclists, cars and other vehicles outside the peak hour. So whilst existing conditions are clear to all, and they're poor, they are whilst this redevelopment site is effectively dormant. So whilst existing conditions are clear to all, you will appreciate that the existing highway conditions will only worsen along Station Road with the associated redevelopment unless action is taken to address current problems. Based on the site allocation policy, associated pedestrian movements along Station Road are predicted to increase by 30 to 40%, and this equates to 6 people using Station Road every 2 minutes. Given the current vacant status of the application site, the predicted increases in pedestrian movements and traffic volumes will also take place from a relatively standing start, as there are no significant pedestrian or vehicular movements associated into and out of the site at the moment. The plan below me here shows the indicative master plan which was submitted with this application against an aerial photograph of the local area. The location of the site and its proposed reuse functions will mean that there will be significantly increased demand to cross Station Road from the north and east of the site as traffic and pedestrian movements are predicted to increase. There is currently no demand to cross the road. There are around 250 properties in the Welton area whose occupants would reasonably be expecting to safely cross Welton Road to access the redevelopment site for their employment and local shopping needs. And a medium-sized store of this size would attract between 160 and 200 traffic movements per hour in the peak hour. So there'll be a significant increase. So in terms of the policy for the site, there's no provision at the moment for any improvement to Station Road as part and parcel of the policy.
Could you get to your microphone, please? Because otherwise the public won't be able to hear you.
No pedestrian crossings. The policy is completely silent. And as your officer explained at the last meeting, the existing carriageway and associated footway are simply not wide enough to achieve any improvements. And this may in itself explain the oversight. Whatever the Council's reason for the admission, the emerging position is clear and predictable. Without improvements, the position on Station Road will significantly worsen and become quite unsafe.
Okay, thank you for that. Just 3 minutes is up, I'm afraid.
Okay, if I just wrap up. In these circumstances, I strongly urge you to support your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Okay, so that is the Town Council representation and public speakers, including a representation from the applicant. I now invite Councillor Michael Orton, who's one of the ward members, to speak.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I've lived in Midsomer Norton for 5 years and was elected as a ward councillor in the May elections of this year. As a resident of Welton, I'm very aware of the Welton Bibby site, as I walked up Station Road on my way into the High Street at least 2 or 3 times a week. The current pavement on the east side of the street heading into town is very, very narrow and a real issue for people with pushchairs, wheelchairs, or in my case, when I've been walking my dog. There is little room to pass, and many a time I've been forced to step into the road to allow people to pass. I know there are various points up there which you can very stand in, but they're not always easy to access. Station Road is a very, very busy and very dangerous road, with cars driving too fast and large lorries and coaches struggling to navigate the narrow width of the road. This makes it even more challenging for people having to step into the road when trying to pass on the pavement. The enabling application includes the placing of 2 pedestrian crossings at the north and south end of the site, enabling safe crossing of the road and hopefully slowing down traffic, which will improve pedestrian safety. The Welton Bibby site has remained derelict for many years, attracting nesting seagulls, which are a real nuisance to residents, with noise and making a mess on local cars. Since my election in May, I have received various emails and calls on this very subject. During my election campaign to get elected, I canvassed over 300 households to ask what the pressing issues for the ward were. The perceived inaction on the Welton Bibby site was mentioned regularly, with people wanting to know when a decision would be made about its future. Not once was I ever asked to keep the building as it is, the brewery. Not once did anyone say, please leave the site as it is. In addition to emails and conversations I have received about the site, I am aware of at least 2 separate petitions asking people to support the development of the Welton Bibby site. Together, over 250 people, or 280 now with the figure this morning, have signed showing their support for this particular application. I appreciate the historical significance of the brewery building as a heritage asset, but I feel that the current application will consider this in terms of using some of the brick work in the construction of the walls along the new pavement on Station Road, and also the introduction of the grass embankment will actually make it a nicer site to walk by, because it's actually a pretty derelict building that you walk by every day. If this enabling application is rejected by the Planning Committee today, we will be unable to improve safety for pedestrians along Station Road, and it will continue to be a danger for walkers and mobile wheelchair users. It will also make it very difficult for building vehicles to access the site for any future construction project. As one of the ward councillors for Midsummer Norton and a local resident, I support the planning application 100%, and I hope the committee will do likewise today.
Thank you, Councillor Orton, keeping it within 3 minutes as well. Thanks for that. So we are just about 30 minutes into this committee meeting. So we'll get to the next phase now of considering this application, which is where we invite members of the Planning Committee to ask questions of the officers. So is there anybody who wants to speak? Councillor Jackson.
Well, I've got 2 questions, if I may ask the Highways officer about them. Because I went on, well, I know this site extremely well, as I too go past it several times a week. And in particular, I take the 414 bus, which comes up to Stones Cross, but instead of going down Station Road, goes down the High Street, and on its return journey, it comes back past the West Clewes football ground. It only runs every 2 hours. It's been intimated that there may be another bus service coming in to go down Station Road, and I wondered if the Highways officer, if any consideration had been given to the impact if the buses were to go down Station Road, whether, you know, how the capacity would work on that. And the second question is, looking at it from the top by the Stones Cross on the site visit, actually without being run over, is this widening of the road that's planned with the demolition of a non-listed historic asset going to help? Because will we not still have a problem at the roundabout? And similarly down at the bottom, are there any plans at the Welton Stream, with the apologies to the ducks of course, to make the road wider there? Because it seems we're just, you know, we've still got 2 bottlenecks. Is this going to help, and is there a wider plan for improving access up and down Station Road? And final question, would it not be better to reroute the A362 up North Road?
Okay, so questions in order. Station road buses, so when the application was considered, the impact that you were talking about didn't form part of that assessment. However, there are clearly lots of large vehicles that use that road, and there's a bus coach depot just around the corner. So clearly vehicles of that size use the road, so they would have been assessed. In terms of the improvement and the scale of improvements, they will clearly significantly enhance pedestrian connectivity across the site frontage, but you rightly point out there are other bottlenecks, and they will have to be determined in the future as part of a wider planning application for the master plan, whether further works are needed at that time. But all I can do at the moment is consider what's in front of us. Future schemes would have to be considered at a later date. And in terms of rerouting the A road, I'm not aware of any plans to do that, and that wouldn't be, again, within the remit of this decision-making process.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Councillor Hughes, you want to ask some questions?
Thank you. Hi, Chris. Sorry, Barry, I've lost my glasses, so I'm going to, if I struggle a little bit, be patient. So, a couple of questions. So, looking at the pavement improvements, first of all. So, we're widening the pavements, the existing pavements, by about 1 metre, is that right?
So the existing metre on the eastern side is approximately 1 metre in width, although it does vary in width across the length of the site.
Yeah.
And that's being increased, that would be increased to 1.8 metres.
Okay.
And the new footway on the western side would be 2 metres in width.
Okay. So if we're widening that, are we moving the highway over by that distance? Because it's not clear from the plans whether we're actually making the road narrower or whether we're shifting the highway over by that distance.
So the highway alignment would be shifted, the carriageway, and the width of the carriageway would be 6 metres, which is approximately the same as it is already. So there'll be no significant changes in the width of the carriageway for vehicles.
So we don't have an issue with the width of the carriageway as it currently stands?
The issue with the width of the carriageway as it stands is that there's no, on the western side, the building is immediately adjacent to the carriageway.
But
so
we're not going to, it's just not clear from there whether there's going to be effectively a small dogleg where it's effectively shifted.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think the margins that are moving are not significant enough to cause a noticeable dogleg that you're talking about. Okay,
great. Thank you. Can I ask a second? So I just wanted, Chris, to look at this. So the opening proposal was said application for enabling works for preparation of policy SSV4. So SSV4, particularly when it applies to this location, was produced in collaboration between Baines Council and Planning Policy and Midsomer Norton Town Council. And the current SSV4 says, regarding this building, it says, the majority of the buildings on site are of limited quality. The 1850s brewery buildings survive largely untouched and with most of their external architectural features intact. These present a considerable asset to incorporate into future development of the site. So there seems to be a little bit of a conflict here between what we're proposing and the SSV4 policy that it refers to.
And the question is, sorry?
The question is, we have a conflict here between the proposal and the SSV4.
Yes, so I've acknowledged that there is a conflict with SSV4 in my recommendation. The point is that we have in a discretionary planning system which is is development plan led, so we are supposed to follow the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And in this case, as I've set out in my report, my belief, my professional judgment is that the material considerations in this case, primarily those pedestrian and highways improvements to Station Road, but also the improved connectivity to the High Street, the improvement of the pedestrian experience along Station Road, and the opening up of views to the conservation area the enabling works increasing the attractiveness of the wider allocation to investors and increasing the chances of it coming forward for development. The removal of the modern, visually intrusive industrial buildings, those things essentially add up to material considerations which justify departure from the development plan in this instance.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there will obviously be some debate shortly on the material considerations. Councillor Gawley, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just to clarify, you want to knock the buildings down, the brewery buildings down. I totally understand about knocking down the rest of the industrial buildings because they have no value. But you want to knock the brewery buildings down in the hope that a developer will come forward because somehow or other those small 3 buildings on the much larger site somehow prevent a developer coming forward. Is that correct? Is this sort of in the hope, in the expectation, in the anticipation?
So obviously, I'm not promoting the development. It is I'm making a recommendation what's put in front of me.
I'm not you,
but of course, I know you know that. The point is that there are benefits that arise from the demolition of the brewery building. As I've listed, some of those would be primarily the pedestrian benefits, which couldn't be delivered without the demolition because there simply isn't the space, the physical space to do that. I have suggested that one other potential benefit, and you will notice my report is caveated in this. Let me have a look at the relevant section. When you can find. Where's it gone? Ah, there it is. I've said that whilst the grant of planning permission offers no guarantee that those works will actually take place, the application proposes enabling works which are of a relatively small scale and designed to help prepare the site, making it easier to attract investors for redevelopment. The success of this approach remains to be seen, but given the lack of progress on the site over the previous decade, there is merit in trying a different approach. And so that's how I've pitched it. I'm not saying it will suddenly unlock the site and will be developed, but it is a subsidiary potential benefit that can be taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just building on a previous question. The policy SSV4, I'm assuming this policy was introduced in the local plan partial update. That's the first time it was written, or was it updated in the partial plan update?
So it was updated in the partial plan update, yeah. But the requirement to retain the brewery building has been longer standing. That one wasn't really changed.
So my question is, the local partial plan update was kind of subject to a lot of consultation. It was agreed in January this year. What has changed for the retention of the brewery to be considered important in January 23 and now 8 months later that a highways improvement is confers more public benefit? I'm also mindful of the inspector process and the process that went through that local plan update. Was this the issue of possibly demolishing the brewery? Did that come forward in any consultations, or was that explored by the inspector? Because 8 months later we're proposing a different outcome. I do have a second question after that. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. No. It's a perfectly valid question. So what primarily has changed is we've received this planning application, and with that consideration of the proposals that have been put forward, which, as I've already said, include these pedestrian and highways improvements. That was not something that I understand was being sort of considered or consulted upon as part of the local plan partial update. Albeit, obviously, that we should always be cautious when setting aside development plan policies, particularly those that have been recently adopted. But we have looked at this carefully, and Officer's view is that in the light of this proposal, we believe the benefits do outweigh the harms in this case.
Yeah, thank you. And a follow-up question was, so in your planning balance, so I want to ask you questions about this now, as you can't later. So great weight is given to the harm, and you recognise that. And then there's a series of things that might mitigate that, the gains from it. But I just wondered whether whether you've gone through the process of negotiating some of the extra things, the cycleway through and pedestrian access across the site, whether if we were minded to delegate to permit, whether the public benefit could be extended beyond this kind of this stretch of road, Station Road, by having conditions to, or having the potential to negotiate those extra benefits into the going forward of the possibility of having, I mean, it's obviously difficult to agree a route across a site in advance, but to have the potential of those things in the future, because I think that would add to the public benefit side of the argument.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hodge. So, obviously, and we say this all the time, I have to assess the application that's been submitted, and I've reached a judgment based on the application that's been submitted. And I've come to the conclusion that those benefits outweigh the harms. It wouldn't then be open to me to say, I want more benefits, because I've already reached that conclusion. However, the situation we are in here is that there is a allocated site for which there is a detailed policy, which you've seen, and does require improvements in terms of connectivity through the site and other things. And so there are opportunities in the future to, with future development proposals that may come forward, to secure further benefits and things like that. But those are not things you can consider today. You'd have to consider keep your considerations to within the scope of this application.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm mindful of the time, so if there are any more questions, if we can try and keep them as brief as possible so we can get up to the debate. Councillor McPhee.
Sorry. The comment that Councillor Moxham made about the likely damage of having large vehicles going so close to the brewery, how seriously do you rate that?
In all new highway design, you'd have a separation between a running carriageway and any structure, and you'd have about half-metre clearance to make sure that the building was not struck. And it may be significantly more than that, depending on the geometry of the road. So, yeah, if we were designing a new road, we'd have a clearance to make sure it wasn't hit.
There is a scenario where the brewery gets knocked down and nothing else happens and just sits there. Is there a condition which, once they start on the brewery, the developers have to conclude the traffic works?
Yes, so we've proposed that this be incorporated into a Section 106 legal agreement between the council and the landowner, ensuring that there is a programme in place before any demolition takes place to ensure that there's a programme for the rebuild, and obviously that would be enforceable as a contract between the council and the landowner.
Okay, I'll take two further questions so we can get into the debate and then start to determine the application. So Councillor Hughes, then Councillor Gawley.
Thank you. Sorry, could I just ask for a clarification on that last question? So if demolition were to happen but the works were not to happen, we have a method of enforcing that and ensuring that those the pavements and all the works do actually happen, or do we have an enforcement possibility there or not?
Yes, so if there was if obviously the building does need to be demolished before those works take place, because that's the only physical order in which they can take place. But if there is a failure to comply with that, that would be a breach of the Section 106 agreement, and we would have various enforcement powers, as a breach of contract. I would have to defer to legal colleagues about the likelihood of securing injunctions and those sorts of things, but there are definitely options available to us to ensure that.
David, would you like to comment?
Just a brief additional comment. My understanding is that the 106 is to require a highways agreement under Section 278 and or Section 38 as necessary, and then the enforcement would be via those agreements. Does that sound correct?
Yes, that's correct. But there's also the second part to the Section 106, which is requiring the rebuild of the facade and the programme for that.
Okay, because obviously we've seen issues with sites, demolition sites historically, from the Bath Press site to the Co-op in Radstock, where demolition has happened, works have completely stopped.
Councillor Hughes, do you want to mention that when you speak in the debate? And then we can just get a question from Councillor Gawley so that we can get on with the discussion. Okay. All right, thank you. Councillor Gawley.
Just again for clarification, this application is just for demolition of part of the site. It's not for the whole of the site. So therefore, we've still got the rest of the site to demolish before anything else can happen. Is that correct? And we don't have an application to demolish the rest of the site?
That's correct. It's only the area indicated as phase 1 on this drawing here. The reason the other buildings are not included at this stage is because updated ecology surveys haven't been provided on those other buildings. We have got them for the buildings that are proposed for demolition. The previous outline consent did include the demolition of those other buildings as well, so I think it's just a case of updating those surveys.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Hughes, you're the other ward member for Midsummer Norton North, so you can begin the debate and you can say anything you wish, you know.
Thank you. Okay, so as you can imagine, I've been contacted by a lot of residents regarding this site, and it's been a topic of conversation for the last decade or so in Midsummer Norton, and it's hugely frustrating that the site is as it is. On balance, I've received about 50-50 in terms of residents' comments, 50% in favour of this proposal and 50% are against. I fully understand those that think we should just knock it down because, as I say, it's a brownfield site that's been sat there for decades, despite the current owners being given planning permission, having adjustments made to our local plan to help them to enable this site to be developed. After all this activity by Baines, still we have no action. And there is a frustration because we're about to start work on the Soma Valley Enterprise Zone on a greenfield site when we have a brownfield site sat here in the middle of Midsummer Norton doing nothing. So I understand the frustration. I also understand the comments from residents who feel that this is an important building. It may not be a pretty building, but then industrial heritage isn't necessarily pretty. We have a batch, or a slag heap, if you want to call it, up the road, which is also a non-designated heritage asset. Maybe we think it's pretty in Midsummer Norton, but other people may not. So, but it is 180 years old, and it does reflect a very important part of Midsummer Norton's history. I mean, Midsummer Norton, back in the 1800s, certainly through the reign of Victoria, was primarily a brewery area. Most of Midsummer Norton High Street and this site were all breweries. So I understand, and there is concern that if you demolish all of the features of this site, I mean, I know the previous application was also to demolish the woods to the west by the metal bridge. If you demolish the woods, you demolish the heritage buildings, you're left potentially with just a very bland, generic housing estate that doesn't truly reflect Midsummer Norton or Welton. We've had mention of Midsummer Norton Town Council, who previously on the application, I mean, they stated that the Town Council regards the brewery buildings as having high heritage value and considers it must be retained in its entirety. That was on the previous planning application. They worked very closely with Baines on the policy for SSV4 to ensure that the building was protected through that SSV4 policy. The opinion has now done a U-turn from the Town Council. I don't know why, but the opinion now is to support it. So we can see there is this contradiction and this between the two opposing parties within this development proposal. So if we were to permit, what are the outcomes? We don't honestly know, because although we're demolishing a building, we don't know what we're being offered in its place. We don't know if we're getting something better, because there is nothing here to tell us what's going to be developed on the site. This is purely to demolish. And as I mentioned earlier, we have experience of sites where demolition has happened, works have stopped, we have no real teeth to enforce. So, I mean, the Bath Press site, as an example, was demolished 7 years ago, and there's a pile of rubble at one end of it, the size of a house. And that pile of rubble has just sat there, and finally, we give them planning permission after lots of wrangling, and what happens? The site goes up for sale. So we now have to wait for a developer to turn up and do something with the site. So that pile of rubble will be there for another few years yet to come. The co-op in Radstock, we have a similar issue. The demolition works have happened, and then work stopped. So there is a concern that if we end up with demolition with no works, what are we going to be sat looking at for the next few years, decades? What are the alternatives? I mean, if we look at a similar age building in Bath, the Newark buildings on the Lower Bristol Road, opposite the Esso garage, very similar looking. There's a lot of features similarities between the two buildings in some of the features. The Newark buildings, rather than demolish it, it's been renovated, it's been turned into commercial space, and it's absolutely amazing. It looks fantastic, and it's a real asset to Bath. And it's a reflection, it's a really nice reflection of the heritage of Bath, of its industrial area. So, on this one, I feel a little bit frustrated because I share everyone's frustration. I've been a resident in Midsummer Norton for 30 years. I run up this road almost on a daily basis when I'm out exercising. I understand the frustration with this site and the fact that nothing's happened. But I'm just not convinced, regardless of whether you feel the building should be retained or demolished, I just don't feel that this is the way to do it. I think we need to understand if it is going to be demolished, we need to understand what's going to replace it. If it's not going to be demolished, understand what we can do to renovate it. But in isolation, there's too many unknowns in approaching it in this way. So at this point, I'm not really in favour of this approach.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
I didn't declare an interest because I didn't think what we have here is a plan to demolish. It is not a plan to build a supermarket, and I think there's a certain amount of confusion which I can well understand in people's minds, because there's no question the top end of the High Street of Midsummer Norton desperately needs regeneration. Mackay's have closed, and to have a large supermarket up here, for many people, would be ideal. But I am a director of the Radstock Cooperative Society, and so I've been considerably involved in the Radstock Cooperative Society site in Westfield Ward, which has been demolished and to which reference has been made and which probably will continually be made in this debate. But the situation there is different. We put in an application, first of all, for an outline consent, which we got. We then got consent for the first half of the site to be developed for offices and shops, and that went through. And it was only the third application, which was the complete demolition of the site. The circumstances which have hindered the implementation of the first two consents may be the same as what might possibly hinder further development of this site, but it's really, the demolition came as stage 3, and we're asking here to consent for stage 1, and we don't know what might come forward, and we do know that for developers the situation is extremely difficult, both getting manpower, both getting materials, any number of reasons. They might put in a viability study to say, well, sorry, we can't reconstruct this historic building because it's going to simply be too expensive and the site will be unviable. So I'm afraid I have great scepticism about this application, much the same mind as Councillor Hughes. Thank you.
Okay, we can't hypothesise about other sites. Obviously, we've got to consider this application on its merits. And yes, I know there is anxiety, particularly with the Bath Press and Radco, but we do need to focus on the merits of this particular proposal, not the conduct of the applicant or whether it is going to be marketable as a result of the demolition. So, Councillor McPhee, you want to make some points?
It is a very difficult one, and I've swung to and fro. But when it comes down to it, I believe there is the risk of long-term damage. So I believe there is a genuine case that it's not in a suitable place. And I think planning should be commended for considering the idea of making a very good facade which we can see and celebrate, and having a footpath through that. I've asked the question about whether it's going to happen or not, and I've received an assurance that it will. So on the basis of that and the future development of that area, I will support the application.
Okay, thank you. You would table that motion, would you, to support the application? Okay. We'll carry on debating, but before we do take a vote on that, does anyone want to second that? Councillor Crossy will second it. And you also want to make some further comments?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a fascinating building, and it's, as many people have said, it's been something that's been lying dormant there in its current state for many, many years. I think those of us who regularly go to Midsummer Norton will have seen it in its state, gradually deteriorating, gradually producing nothing of real benefit for the community, and certainly annoying the residents that live along that part. So what we've got here is an enabling exercise, and I don't have any problem with enabling. I don't have any problem with the fact that they've not yet said what they want to put behind it. In response to Sean, who said that there's nothing happening here, the planning application is not just a demolition, it's a rebuild. And so there is something happening here, and we are rebuilding the historic facade. Okay, it's not in its original location, and it's not completely in its original format. But we often have the debate when we talk about historical replacement that it shouldn't be identical, it should be slightly changed so that it reflects the fact that it isn't the original. And I think what you've got here, I think there was one of those pictures we saw, there was a gentleman in a wheelchair, it might have even been our speaker here, and you could see that there was absolutely no room on that pavement. His wheelchair hardly fitted on the pavement. What are you going to do with a young family taking a double buggy? One wheel will be on the pavement and the other wheel will be on the road. That doesn't work. And some of these wider single buggies, the triangular ones, which would go to quite wide, I don't know if they would fit on it. So we've got an unsuitable pavement, we've got a number of pedestrians, and we've got a proposal to widen that pavement, and actually, in addition, put a pavement on the other side. What's not to love? It's a fantastic proposal. And we've got to think about pedestrian safety. It is an important part, particularly when you've got families with young children walking along, and to have a pavement on both sides, plus some extra trees, plus the heritage respected with the wall rebuilt further back to enable whatever comes forward in the future. And like Councillor Jackson, I hope it's not just for a single huge supermarket, and we can't tell what's in the future. And in reference to the site in Bath, well, we didn't want a site that had no affordable housing in it, and we've got the site on the other side of the road being built. You can't have two huge projects going on at the same time, in my view, so I don't have a problem with delaying that. But what I do have a problem is that we've got nothing happening here for decades, nothing likely to happen for decades if we don't start something now. So I think this is one of those cases where we just have to have some trust in the development industry. And, there's too many people always give the development industry no credit. They do a lot of good. They bring jobs, they employment, they develop things, they change things. And development is about change. And the question, therefore, is what is the change that's required in this corner of Midsummer Norton, Welton Vale? And people have said, well, it's not perfect because we've still got the Stonecross pub there and then the pavement doesn't get all the way there. Yes, nothing is ever perfect in life. You don't actually always get to the end destination you want in one hit. But this would start the process, and it would mean that when Stonecross pub comes up with its application for its bit, we've got a precedence in a new pavement built, and it would be easy to say that actually whatever comes there has to complete that pavement. So I'm absolutely in favour of this scheme. I know there's risk in the future that the developers might not deliver, but it's a good start. We're retaining a replacement facade that has respect to the tradition that we've got there in the fact that it looks very similar but is not identical. We've widened the pavement on the one side and we're bringing a new pavement in on the other side, and so I think this is a scheme that the committee should get behind and support, and I'd like to commend the officers for the way they've written the report. And in a planning policy, you can always, with any scheme, you can always find one planning policy that would invalidate that scheme. And so what we have to do is weigh it up in the balance, which is what the officers have done, and on balance, I completely support this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crossley. Okay, thank you. You need to press on, please. So, just to remind the committee, there is a motion that's been tabled by Councillor McPhee and seconded by Councillor Crossley to support the officer's recommendation to permit under delegated powers. However, the debate could continue, so Councillor Gawley wants to make some more points.
I'm mindful of a development in Road, which I've visited relatively recently, where there is a brewery, and in its yard there is a housing development. The brewery's been turned into flats for older people, and it's been retained, and it has its heritage characteristics unaffected, and I think that's a really good model. So that's one thing. Secondly, I mean, to go to Councillor Crossley's point, this is only a partial pavement. It's only part of the brewery buildings, and you can't get all the way up on that side anyway, so you've got to cross over two ways either. I'm not sure why we can't widen the pavement on the other side if that's what the driver is to this. But thirdly, I'll say this is not the whole development. This proposal doesn't develop the whole site. It only knocks an old building down and potentially you get a wider pavement on the other side. That's all this is doing. This is not answering the frustration that I understand that the Midsummer Norton residents have about the Welton Bibby site. What you want is a proper proposal for the whole site to develop it down, and that really is what you want. And you could potentially have a better access, right from, is it Welton Road at the bottom where there's obviously a clear gap, and that's where you could have access to the site for the store or whatever it is, without having knocked down one of your heritage assets.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, I agree with the comments made by Councillor Hughes and Councillor Gormley beside me. What I'm concerned about, again, is it's not the complete, it's an enabling application, but we do have to think about the policy and the weight of the public benefits, and I know that officers thought about that, and I'm thinking about it in a different way. And I'm concerned that a number of points in the public benefits are quite weak. They repeatedly say that there will be, say, point 4, enhancement of the conservation area as a result of demolition of the modern industrial buildings and the opening of new views. We are not getting the demolition of the modern industrial buildings, and we have absolutely no certainty that we'll get opening of new views. I mean, we don't know what's going to be built around that facade. The views could be actually less in the future, so we can't hold on to that, the desire that there will be views and opening up of a site. And point 8 is removal of the modern visually intrusive industrial buildings on the site would enhance the setting. as one of the public benefits, which again is the same point repeated, and it's not what this application offers. So I have concerns, and I'm unable to support the proposal.
Okay, thank you. So listen to the debate. I mean, yes. So sorry, Councillor Warren.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think it's quite as black and white as it looks, really. You've got the options. In one hand, you've got the redevelopment, which it needs desperately, and we all know that. However, in the past, there's been a full planning application, and nothing happened. So the question to that is why. And I believe during that application before, you had pedestrian access through the middle, which has saved a lot of problems. You get the demolishment now, which, yeah, great, it needs to come down. Why the whole lot can't come down, I don't know. You need an ecological... We could have done that survey, could have done that before. It only takes not a lot of time to do it. You could have knocked the whole lot down then. You know, the one issue is to me, is the one building. So we knock the building down and we build a little facade, which is a bit... Is it that little bit Disneyland? I don't know. It's a little bit sort of neither one thing nor the other. You know, to me, if you're going to knock it down and put something better than the facade up there. You either don't have anything, or actually, why can't you reconstruct the building? If you want to move it back off the road, you can restructure the building as if you're building a new building, because I understand from a developer's point of view, having done a bit myself and a few barn conversions and things, it's often cheaper to build new. So why don't you rebuild that to look as it is? So you could put it back 6 metres, wherever you needed, but actually rebuild that building, and you can build it now so it looks like it did in 18, whenever it was, but make use of it. It could be a nice block of flats. So you've got the best of both worlds then. You'd have, you would have the new build, and you'd be moving forward, but you'd have the historical aspect still there, but it'd be new and in use, rather than just an old building that you couldn't use. A lot of this could have come forward and didn't. So in some ways, I get why it's got to come down, but I don't think it's quite as black and white as we like to think. And normally I'm very black and white with everything, as you know, anyone that knows me will see. And I actually think that they need to come back with something a little bit better, to be honest with you. And it would not be hard to do. You know, I'd be very supportive if you just rebuilt that building back 5 metres, so you said the historical element, rather than the facade. I don't understand the facade, if I'm honest with you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hughes?
Sorry, just one more quick. So actually, I mean, I would agree with Councillor Warren there. If instead of facade, it actually formed the frontage of an actual building, that would actually be perhaps a compromise that would find more favour here, certainly in my opinion. And with regard to the access, I mean, the application that was actually approved brought the pedestrian and cycle route through the sites. So it actually took all the cyclists and the pedestrians away from the road completely, so they were completely safe. So there are other options available here.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Just a quick question. Assuming if the committee decides to support the officer and delegate to permit, is that going to be a departure from the local planning policy update and other BAIDS policies that will require a referral to the Secretary of State?
Short answer is yes.
So, sorry, that would be a referral to the Secretary of State?
I believe it's a notification to the Secretary of State on a departure, yes.
Okay, so if it's advertised as a departure, it could still be called in and there could be a public inquiry. Okay, right, thank you. Okay, does anybody else want to speak before we take the vote as to whether to support the officer's recommendation? No. I mean, my views on this is we have to bear in mind it isn't a listed building per se. That's not to diminish the fact that it is still a heritage asset and it does have some importance to Midsummer Norton. But this site has stood derelict for many years, and I know certainly there is public sentiment that people want to see this site unlocked for positive change. It does pain me to think that we would see the demolition of the building, which has been there for 160, 70 years. But in light of the the policies and the MPPF in respect of loss of a non-designated heritage asset. If this is outweighed by the public benefit, then that is something that I can personally support. The public benefit is that it will unlock the site. We can see new housing, we can see new jobs, we can see retail on there. So that would be win-win. It's regrettable that the existing building can't be retained, and we've all talked about the what if, but unfortunately the application is before us and we need to make a decision now on that. So I'm going to ask everybody if we can now vote. So those in favour of... Sorry.
Wait, just one more to add. Nothing's happened there, but it could have done. I think that's the issue. I think the council are getting a lot of blame for this, and actually it could have happened because there was an application that had been permitted, and I don't think we need to forget that, really.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Councillor McPhee has tabled that we recommend, well, we approve the application under delegated powers. That's been seconded by Councillor Crossley. So can I get a vote, please, for those in favour? And those against? Okay, so that's 5 against, so that means that the planning application has been refused. Yes, so we need to have someone to move that decision and second it. So the vote has been, the vote has failed. Oh yes, so we need to, we need to table a motion to refuse the application. Yeah, okay. And we will need to give a reason for refusal as well, just to bear that in mind. So,
well, I think the main reason is it's contrary to SSV4. Would be our prime reason. But, I mean, there's been a lengthy discussion. I mean, I think it's important that we can identify that reflects the conversation that's happened here today, which is that we need to, we want the development to go forward in some respects. We need to find a way to enable that. But as it currently stands, this application is not acceptable. But SSV4 is probably the
okay. So the reason for refusal is the loss of a non-designated heritage asset. Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor, so you're happy to table that motion to refuse? Okay. Anyone to second that, or Councillor Hodge, you want to make a comment? Right, Councillor Jackson to second. So can we vote then, please? And,
yes, I'll second it on those grounds that it's contrary to policy, and secondly, I don't feel that the benefits that would outweigh the less than substantial harm created by the loss of a historic building have been sufficiently demonstrated.
Okay.
But I would like to add as a footnote that I think it's correct that the applicant could come in within 6 months with a modified application, and that might very well address the problem sufficiently.
Okay, so the second motion that we need to vote on is to refuse planning permission for the development. So those in favour of refusing? And those against? Okay, so planning permission has been refused. We've been quite a while on that item. Shall we take a 5-minute break and then come back to the other 2 applications? Okay, welcome back to the second part of the committee. So we'll move on to the next item, which is for planning application 22/04498/FUL, and this relates to the cottage Sutton Hill Road in Bishop Sutton. So the case officer is, well, acting for the case officer is Chris Griggs-Trevarthen.
Thank you. So this is an application for a single-storey front extension to the cottage Sutton Hill Road, Bishop Sutton. So we can see the site outlined here in red. And this is Sutton Hill Road running along here, and it's off a sort of side road track that serves a number of properties down this way. And here's an aerial photograph of the site. You can see it's surrounded by other residential dwellings. Here's some photographs. So the property is actually this one on the right-hand side here, a sort of traditional style building, although I don't think it's actually that old. And this building here is not actually in the ownership of this property here. It's got a garage on the front here, which you'll see is of relevance to considerations. But if we move on, you can see there's that adjacent building there. There's the application property, and the extension would be on the front here, as we'll see in the plans in a moment. And then just looking down that access road, as you can see, it's quite heavily vegetated, particularly at the moment. And as you move down there, you can see there's the adjacent building and there's the application site. There it is again. And this is looking from the property immediately to the west, which is Bramley House, looking towards their sort of boundary wall with the site. You can see there's quite a high stone wall between the two sites, and this is where the extension will be coming out the front here as well. So just moving on to some plans. So this is the property here. This is the adjacent building with the garage on the front, as you can see. And the extension would come out approximately 4.4 metres from the front extension, front of the house, located on here. It's an existing elevation. There we go. That's just the existing rear elevation, and nothing's happening there. And then from the side, these are the existing side elevations. So this is the front, this is the back, and then from the other side. Moving on to the proposed elevations, so you can see the extension here, single-storey, monopitch roof, a little axometric drawing here, showing you the extent of it, the scale of it, and again you can see it from the side in this image here. And just a couple more of those 3D sort of visual views of it. The application is recommended for refusal on the basis of the scale and positioning of the extension, resulting in a dominant addition to the existing cottage, and the loss of symmetry and the covering of the primary front entrance. Happy to take any questions after the speakers, if there are any.
Thank you, Chris. I should also just point out that Councillor Beaumont has given apologies, so he's no longer taking part in the committee. Okay, we have one speaker. We have Mr. Bonner, if you'd like to come to the table. Okay, if you can turn on your microphone and speak clearly into it, and we'll give you 3 minutes to put your case forward.
Well, hopefully this one should be a little bit more simple than the last one. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barney. I'm a director at BPB Architect, and we're the agents in charge of this application. The application seeks permission for a single-storey front extension to the existing house. The proposed extension allows the house to be extended to provide much-needed space to facilitate working from home. The applicants both run their own successful businesses as full-time jobs, and this involves a lot of home-based working, and the current layout lacks suitable space to accommodate this essential need, with the front garden being largely underutilised. The proposals provide a new entrance lobby, larger entrance hallway, and office area. The provision of a downstairs shower room also provides an element of future-proofing to the house should the owners ever struggle with mobility issues in the future. Due to the location and orientation of the house, the proposed extension has a minimal visual impact on the local context. The house is tucked away from general view and is not visible from Sutton Hill Road. The layouts have been carefully designed to not overlook any of the neighbouring properties and are not considered to be overbearing. The proposed extension is traditional in character and appearance, as in keeping with the host dwelling and local context. The combination of stonework and render helps to break up the massing as well as respect the overall character and appearance of the area. The rendered sidewall facing the neighbours will match the rear extension of the house, and the proposed extension would be viewed against the existing garden wall, which is also render. So what little you actually see of the front elevation from Bramley Cottage will match the existing material palette. The recessed entrance area will be clad with timber to create a warm and textured feel to the front door area. This change in material highlights the entrance, and the timber lends a softer, warmer feel to this part of the scheme. The extension has been designed to mirror and reflect the existing garage to create a balanced and symmetrical set of elements to the front of the building. So just to point out previously, although the building that the garage is abutted to isn't part of the application site, the garage is the applicant's. And like I said before, the site is very heavily screened from the local area with matured planting. The proposed roof lights allow natural light into the office, as we did not want to introduce windows into the side elevation, and this natural light creates a happy and healthy working environment. The roof lights will have integrated blinds to minimize light spill. These blinds can be linked to a daylight sensor, so they automatically close at dusk and open at dawn. So in summary, a couple of quick points. The proposed design seeks to sensitively extend the existing dwelling to allow for modern family living requirements, particularly the need to work from home, and this has created dedicated spaces to support this essential need. The application is planning policy compliant and fulfills the requirements of the neighbourhood plan. We welcomed the support of the Parish Council, and thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonner, for that. Right, we'll ask some questions if anybody's got any. I've just got one question, Chris. Reading on the committee report, there was a planning application to build a front extension in 2022. How different is that to the proposal that we're seeing before us now?
So I believe that the previously refused proposal from 2022, it was similar in scale, but it was much more contemporary in its design. I believe the materials were, I don't know precisely what the materials were, but it wasn't to match the existing building.
Okay, so it was similar in scale, and that was refused. The application is being recommended for refusal, as we know, but we'll ask some more questions. Councillor Jackson, then Councillor Gawley.
No, I wondered if the officer could just explain, perhaps with a diagram, the paragraph at the top of page 44. The side elevation, southwest face, is the side which will face our property. The description states, and then it gives the plan reference, render to match main house. However, the main house is stonework. See enclosed picture, which of course we haven't got. And as the other aspects of the front extension will be stonework, this side, in our opinion, should be matching. Can you, I missed that picture. Can you explain how that's going to work?
Yes, so my understanding is the side of the extension that will face this neighbour is to be rendered. Obviously, they pointed to the fact that this elevation of the building is stonework, but we can see in this image there is render on the existing building already. So, render is not the use of render is not an issue in officers' views, and the materials are, in our view, acceptable. But it's a question of its scale and dominance.
Okay, Councillor Gawley.
This area it's not in Greenbelt, is it?
No.
So there isn't an issue about the proportion being less or more than 30% of the extension?
That's correct. You're not. You don't need to apply any of the Greenbelt tests.
But then how big is the extension compared to the rest of the house, roughly?
I don't have that calculation. It's a judgment call as to whether or not, in terms of its character and appearance, the extension is too large and too dominant given its positioning on the front of the property.
But it's smaller than the garage, isn't it?
Yes, I would say it is smaller than the garage, yes.
Okay, has anybody else got a question for Chris? Councillor Hodge?
Yes, I just noticed that the parish councils, their support is dependent on a condition. So if we were to overturn the officer's recommendation, could we include the condition that they have requested on in terms of controls of artificial lighting internally and externally? Because that was in their conclusion of their support was dependent on that condition.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. I think the case officer did actually consider this point on page 51, which is unfortunately missing from my bundle here, but remember what was read was that basically he did consider whether that condition would be appropriate or not, and given the scale of the development, i.e. it's a small householder extension, albeit we take issue with its size and its positioning, that wouldn't be reasonable. It would be an unduly onerous condition to apply to a householder extension. So if you were to overturn the officer's recommendation, my advice would be not to apply that condition.
Does anybody else want to ask any questions? Councillor Jackson.
Going back to, of course, the officer had not envisaged us deciding to permit it, or I think we'll have to be delegate to permit if we're going to do this. There's a question about the boundary wall, also on page 44, with the neighbour's objection. Would it be possible to put a condition in about the safety of this wall? And
I think that's a building regulations issue, isn't it?
Right, okay. Well, they want this wall to go back up again for privacy, apart from the fact they raise questions about whether their house is going to get undermined.
Yes, so again, the officer has considered these issues. I believe, again, it's on page 51, which I unfortunately don't have. But basically, those matters are civil matters. Thank you. Other matters. The walls are positioned within... Concern is raised to the proximity of the extension side south wall to the wall which forms the boundary with the adjacent neighbour. So the wall of the extension with the neighbour's adjacent wall. The walls are positioned within 0.2 metres of each other. Concern is raised to the ability to apply render post-construction, also the potential for damage to the wall during the construction and digging of foundations. Any development requires consent from the building control team and it's expected to comply with building control regulations. So if there are any issues with that wall, that would probably be covered by the Party Wall Act or by building regulations, so not something to be considered by this planning committee.
Thank you, Chris. Okay.
I was raising the question of the neighbour's privacy.
Well, there's no windows shown on that elevation facing the neighbours, so there shouldn't be an issue with privacy.
Okay, can we move now to the debate? Oh, sorry, do you want to debate or do you want to... Okay.
I'll speak, thank you, Chairman. I'm glad I'm back in black and white territory again now, because I usually am. Just looking at this application, I tend to put a lot of weight in these by the parish councils. They're in favour of this. It's been considered against the neighbourhood plan, and anyone that has ever been involved in a neighbourhood plan, they're not taken lightly, and they're quite... I did one in the Chew Valley years ago. It was a lot of work. So it's actually what they want. It's outside the green belt. It's inside the housing development boundary. I know beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I actually quite like the look of the extension, if I'm honest with you. There's been a lot of building in Bishop Sutton. So to me, an extension which makes it better for the family to live in, which everybody agrees with, or most people agree with, especially the parish council. I've got no issue with the lighting. As we heard earlier from the architect, the lighting is going to be automatic, so it's going to get darker, so the blinds are to come down at night. So I'm quite happily moved that we overturn the officer's recommendation, and I guess we need to delegate to permit. Is that the right way of putting this? Okay. Well, I'm happy just to permit, otherwise, as is.
Okay, sorry, do you want to say anything, Dan?
Just on the delegate to permit point, that would be, I assume, so that conditions could be applied, for example, requiring it to be built in accordance with the plans submitted with it, just to make sure that you get what's being shown on the screen. So I think that was the purpose of delegate to permit, subject to conditions, requiring it to be built in accordance with plans.
Okay, I'll come to Councillor Jackson in a second. So you're tabling a motion to overturn the
delegate
officer's
permit.
recommendation. Anyone going to second that? Councillor Jackson wants to second it. Do you want to make some comments about that?
I'm not quite clear in my mind to what extent we should always consider climate emergency. And this, if this is going to enable somebody to work from home who presumably would otherwise commute, and so therefore will be reducing their carbon footprint. Are we allowed to take that into account? But I'm in favour of it anyway, and I'm happy to second Councillor Warren.
Councillor Crossley, did you want to say anything? Did you want to say anything? Have you got... Oh. Okay, all right. Okay, she wanted to ask a question first. That's why I picked her out. Chris, did you want to come back on that?
Just very briefly, I would say that's a fair material consideration you could throw into the balance if you wanted to.
Okay, does anybody else want to make any comments on this? Councillor Crossley.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is quite an interesting little project. First of all, I think you have to put it in bearing in mind what we've already got there, and you've got that neighbouring building with that quite inappropriate garage extension. And so what you've got here is an extension in a similar fashion, but built more sympathetically to the building that it's attached to. And so I don't think there's... I disagree with the officer conclusion that it does substantial harm to that building. I think the substantial harm, if any, that has been done by the garage next door. And therefore, what we've got here is something that is sympathetically added to the building to make the building more fit modern living needs, and by being built in a sort of more sympathetic to the building, I think it improves the location. So I don't agree with the conclusion that's reached that this diminishes and its scale and massing, etc. So I think this is acceptable, and my reason for thinking it's acceptable is because of the garage next door. If there was no garage next door, I might well have a different view on it. But I think we've got to look at what we've got and how it fits in the context of that little community of two houses, and I think this is perfectly acceptable, and I'm happy to vote in favour of the motion to support.
Okay, thank you. I've just got a view. I mean, the justification for recommending refusal is based upon the impact it will have on the house in terms of the symmetry on the house. However, I'm looking at it in context of the adjacent property. I'm in agreement with Councillor Crossley there that the garage protrusion is much more significant than the proposed protrusion on the dwelling. Just because you can't see the property is not an issue, but it is very well screened. And as Councillor Jackson alluded to, you know, it will provide a sizable family home where people can work from home, and it can be adapted into the future. So I will take the vote shortly, but I think I'm going to be committing the cardinal sin as a qualified planner and go against the recommendation. So can I ask then, based upon Councillor Warren's tabling to
Sorry, just because it's an officer overturn, I just want to make sure that we're clear on the reasons. So where we have one person propose a motion and then the second to add in another reason, I just want to go back to the original proposer and confirm that the reasons, as I understand it, are that you view the development as appropriate, and that you're also content with Councillor Jackson's additional point that there is a potential environmental benefit in addition.
Happy to accept that.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. So we have the motion to overturn the recommendation. So therefore, can we have a vote, please, as to whether we overturn the proposal? The recommendation, and grant permission. Those in favour? Okay, so that's a unanimous decision, and planning permission has been granted subject to the conditions we've just discussed. Okay, so we'll go to the third item now. I'm conscious of the time, it's 1:45. This committee was scheduled to end at 1 o'clock, but I don't want to rush the debate. So if we're all happy to stay until we've made the decision, hopefully it won't go on for too long if we do go beyond 1 o'clock. So this is for 8 Rennie Close in Bathwick in the Widcombe and Lincoln ward. Application reference 23/01759/FUL for the erection of a single-storey rear extension. So I'll invite the case officer, Christine Moorfield, when she's ready to... that's so fine. We'll have a quick break. Okay, Christine, are you ready? That's okay, not a problem. Okay, over to you if you want to present the proposal. You want to speak into the microphone so everybody will be able to hear you clearly. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, this application is for a ground floor single-storey extension at number 8 Rennie Close, Bathwick. The property is located in a terrace of properties. It's within the World Heritage Site and the Bath Conservation Area. And to the north west, you'll see is the railway line, which is up on an embankment. Sorry. This is a picture looking at the terrace of properties, and number 8 is the second one in, I think it is. And so it's looking from both ends. So as you can see, the terrace, you know, it's a uniform terrace of properties. This is the back of number 8, and then to either side, I've indicated the boundary with number 7, and as you can see, they've got an extension which was built in about 2013 and was built under permitted development rights. And then on the left-hand side, you've got the boundary with number 9. So this again shows you the extension that's been built at number 7. And then the bottom right-hand photograph is looking from the back of number 8, and that shows you the garden area. They do have reasonably restricted garden areas, amenity spaces at the back. And then beyond that, you can see the vegetated bank up to the railway line. So this is looking directly across the back of number 8, and that's the boundary with number 9. Beyond it, you can see at the end of the terrace there is a sort of another built element across the back there. This photograph's taken from the first floor of number 8, and again you can see the boundary with number 9 to the side that doesn't have the extension. And then you can see the boundary with number 7, and you can just, in the far side, see the corner of their extension. And these photographs are just taken from the top floor, the second floor. Unfortunately, because there's a parapet, I couldn't get far over, but it just gives you an idea of the amenity spaces of the properties. And this one was put in. This is the sort of end of the terrace, and this is just the side of the building that you could see at the end of the terrace. So this is the existing front elevation, and rear elevation of the property. And here's the proposed elevations. As you can see, the front elevation hasn't changed. The rear elevation, so we can see the bifold doors and the chamfered side to the extension, and there's also a roof light up near the ridge line of the property. Here you've got the existing floor plans, ground and first floor, and then you've got the proposed floor plans. And as you can see, the extension extends out by 3.8 metres and goes across the width of the property. It's about 1.2 metres beyond the extension of number 7. And in order to address the issue of light to number 7, the extension's been put on an angle so that the wall adjacent to number 7 is 2.7 metres, and then you have the 45-degree angle, which then takes you to the rear wall of the extension. These are just sections through, or elevations, side elevations, so you can see, because it's got a flat roof with a parapet, you can see that the height has been kept down to just over 3 metres. It's 3.098 metres in height. This is a roof plan, existing and proposed, so you can see from the you can see the extension flat roof, and then the far right plan just indicates the roof light in the roof. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions, standard conditions in terms of the time limit and compliance with the plans. So anyone's got any questions?
Thank you, Christine. We'll come on to the questions in a short while. First of all, we've got some speakers. We have Mr. Goodman, who is objecting to the application, and then we've also got Mr. Tadman, Ms. Tadman and Mrs. Kidd, who are going to be speaking in favour. So, Mr. Goodman, hello. You've got 3 minutes.
I'm speaking to you to represent numbers 6, 7, 9 and 10 Rennie Close, who have all put in well-balanced objections to the proposal, and in my opinion, these objections have not been adequately taken into account. And thanks to both local councillors, this matter has now been referred to you. I have to begin with what I feel has to be the most obvious reason to object, in that of scale. 7 Rennie Close, which you've seen, recently had an extension, which was sympathetically carried out to 2.7 metres, that from the back of the building. The height of the building, that is considerably lower than the one that is being proposed. What we see with the proposal is the extension for the full width. Yes, it may have a splay, but it is for the full width, showing no differentiation with the original build and extending 3.8 from the back wall of the house, some 1.2 metres beyond the rear wall of number 7. It is suggested the height of the extension is low at 3.09 metres. I beg to differ. It will clearly overshadow the extension number 7 and create a structure on the party wall with number 9, which will tower above the garden. In my opinion, the extension will take up so much space that, if approved alongside others in the future, it may well cause harm to the outstanding universal nature of the wider World Heritage status. Make no mistake, other large extension applications will follow, which will cause issues with the World Heritage Site. It is a modern development as a whole, but the original design did not suggest that such a large extension would be necessary because of the very modest garden which you've seen from the photographs, and I hope you will take this into consideration. The Council has a duty to pay particular attention to the preservation and enhancement of the character of the surrounding conservation area, and in my opinion, these proposals by value of design and mass is not considered appropriate to have approval. The suggestion that it is in keeping to have a 4-bedroom house, all with en-suites and a small garden, which you cannot swing a cat in, is, in my opinion, disingenuous and does not suggest to me that further extensions of this size should be permitted. I wonder what the issues here are. With 4 bedrooms, is there an HMO issue? Will there be Airbnb? It's also been suggested by the agent that the size of the extension in relation to the plot size is no different than other permissions. But again, I beg to differ. On number 12 and 14, it does not, those are on the side and partly on the rear, and they do not impact on the garden. Please take a look at these applications and visit the site, and you will see yourself the size of the extension proposed is out of proportion to the size of the garden. I do consider the issue of water drainage has not been taken seriously into account by the agent or indeed the council. The agent's email to authority 23rd June states the surface water will be plumbed directly to the main sewer. We've all seen the pollution that has occurred during heavy rain, with the local authority blamed for allowing sewer spillage.
Okay, Mr. Goodman, we've had 3 minutes now. Can you just finish off?
Just one last sentence. Because the area of the garden is so small, you cannot provide a soakaway. And finally, I wish you take a look at the proposals as a site visit to see what I'm talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to ask Rachel Tadman and Mrs. Kidd to both come to the table. Given you're only able to speak under our protocols for 3 minutes, I presume you're going to be splitting this between you 1 minute and a half each, but we'll still be using the traffic light system. Who wishes to speak first?
Dear Councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and support my client's application. The owners of 8 Rennie Close, Karen and Tim Kidd, are seeking permission for a modest single-storey extension at the rear of the dwelling. Mr and Mrs Kidd sought pre-application advice, which was that, subject to a few amendments, the proposal was acceptable. These comments were taken on board and the plans amended, and those are what you see here today. The extension has been designed to maximise the internal accommodation whilst being very careful to limit the impact on neighbours and the surrounding area. The height of the extension has been kept as low as possible by using a flat roof, and the side elevation facing number 9 has been cut back to 2.7 metres to account for the fact that they have no rear extension. The side elevation is slightly longer at 3.8 metres where it faces number 7, as they already have an extension, meaning the impact would be limited. The extension uses high-quality materials such as natural bath stone. It will not be prominent and it will blend in with the existing developments with limited impact on the World Heritage Sites or the Bath Conservation Area. On parking, there are no additional bedrooms, therefore no need for additional parking spaces. Highways also have not objected. On flooding, the drainage engineer has not objected and the development will comply with building regs. There is no reason, therefore, to think that this proposal will cause any further flooding issues over and above that which the site may normally experience. I can confirm that there are no plans for a holiday let now or in the future, nor an HMO. This is the home of my clients. Also, just picking up at the point about the overdevelopment and the taking up most of the garden. When permission was granted for this development, there was the opportunity for officers, and I think that this development actually came before committee, to remove the PD rights, particularly in respect of rear extensions. Those PD rights could have been removed if officers and councillors were concerned that the gardens were too small.
Just to say there's 1 minute left.
Yeah, they were not removed. Thank you for letting me speak. Now I'll pass over.
Dear councillors, thanks for giving me time to add a few personal points to Rachel's comments. Having been brought up locally, I was delighted to return to Bath nearly 10 years ago when we bought 8 Rennie Close. Since then, our daughters have become adults with partners, and like a number of our neighbours, we now find our home could be better designed to suit our needs. The proposed extension will give us the best configured living and sleeping space for family and friends in the years to come. In consultation with our architect and planning officer, we were careful to design something that fitted in with the neighbouring houses and the surrounding area and limited the impact on our neighbours. We also involved our neighbours in the process, so we were saddened to read their objections, which we hope we've responded to. We are pleased that the planning officer found the proposal acceptable and hope that you agree too.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we have Councillor Alison Bourne, who's the ward member. If you'd like to come forward and make your points.
Okay, thank you. I'm making this statement as ward councillor for Widcombe and Lincoln. My ward colleague, Councillor Collins, agrees fully with it. We asked for this application to be referred to the Planning Committee following concerns raised with us by residents of Rennie Close.
Councillor Collins and I visited the gardens of the adjacent houses at numbers 7 and 9 to assess the impact of the extension in the context of this terrace of houses. We found that the plans and drawings alone did not give a full impression of how overbearing the extension would be for the neighbours, and would urge the committee not to grant approval without having visited the site themselves. I note that the case officer's report describes the extension as modest in its proportions. While the dimensions taken on their own may not seem over-large, we consider that this extension is in fact very large by comparison with the terrace of houses and in the context of the gardens at Rennie Close. First, I'd like to draw to the committee's attention that the extension covers the entire width of the back of the house, going right up to the boundary fences of the adjacent gardens. This is in contrast to the much smaller extension at number 7, which is set back from both boundaries. Although the proposed extension at number 8 is angled in on one side to mitigate against the loss of light to its northern neighbour, it still extends 2.64 metres on that side of the boundary. On the other side, it is proposed to extend 3.8 metres along the boundary. That in itself is an imposing addition for the neighbouring properties. Second, the case officer's report does not consider the size of the extension by comparison to the size of the garden. The gardens at Rennie Close are relatively modest for the size of the houses, and the garden at number 8 only extends 7.9 metres from the property. This means that the proposed extension will take up about half the length of the garden. When this is added to the fact that it will, with the exception of one small angle, also take up the entire width of the property, that means that about half the garden will be covered. For the neighbours, this means that a significant proportion of their gardens will now be boundaried by the wall of the extension. This will create a very overbearing addition to the terrace, which seems to us to be overdevelopment. Third, we're not convinced that the drainage solutions that are proposed will be adequate to prevent any impact on the neighbouring properties. For all these reasons, we would urge the committee not to grant permission in this case. At the very least, we would ask them to visit the site to assess the situation themselves before giving consent, as the scale of the overdevelopment is not clear on paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Spot on 3 minutes almost there. Right, so we move on to questions. Is anybody expressing any interest in asking a question? Because I do have one I'd like to just ask. It relates to permitted development. Are the permitted development rights still in place on this property?
Yes, they are.
Right, okay.
Yes.
So my second question then is, how different in scale is this proposal to what would be allowed under permitted development?
Well, on a terrace property, you can extend by 3 metres. So this is 0.8 of a metre larger. 0.8 of a metre, okay. Yeah. And the height, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go back to ask
I was going to say, the height is 3 metres, and this is just slightly over.
And following on Councillor Bourne's point about it going into the garden, is there a rule about how much curtilage you can occupy with an extension under permitted development?
Well, we don't have any policy or guidance on amenity space. But maybe it's worth noting that permitted development rights do talk about covering 50% of the garden, and in this instance, it's less than 50%.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any other questions? Councillor Gawley?
Yeah, I had a question. I mean, this was obviously built as a family house with 2 smaller bedrooms and 2 larger bedrooms. I don't know what that is. Is that me? Yeah, and I sort of question whether there's overdevelopment of the site, taking half the garden away and putting in 4 large bedrooms. I think you're going to end up with 3 reception rooms, maybe, if you put in the extension, which you say you go from 3 receptions to 3 receptions, but you end up with 4 large bedrooms and en-suites. I'm just thinking, in the future, if is that an overdevelopment of the site?
Is that your question?
Yeah.
Well, each application has to be considered on its merits, and if the applicants want to, occupy. It depends on how they use the rooms. I know they're showing 4 bedrooms, but I think, as I said, in Central Bath, I think garden areas and courtyard gardens are fairly commonplace in large properties, so I wouldn't say that this is something that would warrant refusal of the application. It was my opinion.
Has anybody else got questions for Christine? Councillor Warren?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just confirmed something you were saying about permitted development. Anything under 3 metres is permitted. And this was how big, sorry?
It's 3.098, so it's, yeah.
So I was thinking of the size of the length of it rather than the...
Oh, sorry, it extends out by 3.8 metres.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Jackson.
Sorry, I can't. It's been a long morning. Does it have a sloping roof or a flat roof, this extension?
It's got a flat roof behind a parapet.
Right, so it would always be possible to put a few pots. Going back to people's green footprints, you could always put a few pots out there, or grow lettuce or something.
Yeah, lettuce doesn't require planning permission. Councillor Hodge?
Yes, I'm just thinking about the light to number 9, and also my first question is: is the floor area of the proposed extension looks to be about double the one of number 7? I don't know whether did any calculations. It seems quite a big increase overall on what's already has been done on another house. And secondly, that I'm looking at the. I don't think you showed the ground floor plan has a line, an angled line across number 9, and it won't expand I can't expand the plan to read the writing, but it shows an angle of. I'm just wondering where the shadowing will fall on number 9. I'm thinking that the extension is to the southwest, so as the sun comes round, it's number 9's back garden that will be affected the most. Have you got any studies of the shadow and where that will fall? Or does that line on the plan represent it? I can't read the writing on it.
Yeah, shall I start with your first question? Was you were asking about the footprints. Yeah, the extension to number 7 is set in. If you look on the far, well, actually all the drawings, you can see the extension at number 7 is slightly set in, and it extends out by about 2.7 metres because it's permitted development, so it's within the limits of the permitted development rights. So I haven't calculated the floor area of that because that will have been within the permitted development rights, whereas this one obviously needs planning permission, hence the planning application being submitted. With regard to the 45-degree line, that's indicating a line to allow for some sunlight, recognising that it is on the southern side of number 9, so that will allow some sunlight because of the chamfered edge to the extension, so that will allow it as the sun moves round. But then obviously you've got the embankment at the back, so once the sun gets round, then obviously the embankment in the winter months will cut some of the sun out.
Could I just have a follow-up question? So in that angle, that would be darkness against the back facade. Within the sun would has to come round, so that is the area of shade from the building, isn't it? I think.
Yes. Yeah.
On the back facade of that house. Yeah.
Yeah, where they have their doors the same as number 8 has. Doors at the back of the property. Patio doors.
Yeah, I'm just so the light as it comes round, there will always be a dark corner unless the sun is high in the sky.
Yes, yes. In the winter months, obviously there will be more shadow than in the height of summer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Councillor Jackson.
About 3 years ago, I think it was, we had an extremely similar application to this come in on Barthwick Hill. You know the road that goes up to the university, and you turned left onto this road. Very, very similar, but the difference was, and of course everything has to be on its own merits, was that it was the end of the end of Terrace House. And we, after a site visit where everything was discussed, we refused it. It was then, our decision was then overturned by the planning inspector. And I was just wondering if you'd had a look at that, what the planning inspector's reasons for overturning our decision was, and whether they were relevant here, given the extreme similarity of the two applications, except that, if I remember rightly, being the end of terrace, they were also doing something on the end of it.
No, I'm afraid I don't know the one you've... I mean, the only other thing I would say is, obviously, there is a boundary along the wall at the moment, and obviously that has some impact. You know, you can have a 2-metre boundary, and obviously the extension is therefore a metre above that. So that's the area that you're looking at as causing the overshadowing, element of overshadowing.
Councillor McPhee.
Just to check, as far as you're concerned, this application is fully compliant?
Do you mean in respect of the application as it's submitted?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, there was an issue. I did raise concerns about the issue of boundaries and encroachment on neighbouring land, but details were submitted to show that everything is to be constructed within the applicant's site. So there isn't, because obviously if they sign a certificate A, all the land has to be within the applicant's ownership, which it appears to be, yeah.
Councillor Gawley's got another question.
Yeah, if permitted development allows an extension of 3 metres, why have they not gone for 3 metres rather than 3.8?
I don't think I can answer that. It's
well,
obviously
that's their choice, that's
choice.
their needs, and that's the application we're considering. But yes, I mean, it could have been built under permitted development had it been 3 metres, is what you've suggested. Okay, any more questions? So if not, we'll have a discussion about this. Anyone got any views? Councillor Hodge?
Yes, I'd like to propose a site visit. I'm concerned about the impacts on the residential community of particularly number 9 and potential for loss of light, and I think it's quite difficult to make a decision on the impact of that extension within the terrace, which has been objected to by a number of neighbours without a site visit.
Right, so, given the time of day we're at and given the motion, you put that forward as a motion.
Yeah,
okay,
I have,
so
yeah.
If we get a seconder, and then we'll take a vote on that. So Councillor Jackson, you want to second that? So before we won't have any debate. Okay, right, well... Okay, we've got a vote.
We've had a very good presentation from the officer. We've had a very good counter view from the local ward councillor, and I think we have all the information that we need to be able to reach a conclusion. So I will vote against the site visit.
Okay, so do you want to take that vote then before we carry on? So those in favour of deferring for a site visit, please put your hands up. And those against? What happens now? Well, if I've got the casting vote, I would go against going for a site visit. I think we've got enough information before us to make a decision. Okay, so shall we carry on the discussion? Councillor Cross, did you want to say anything else?
Sorry, yes. I can remember when this original scheme came to Planning Committee several years ago, and I think it was on the Lime Grove School site, isn't it? Which was a really underperforming school, working for disabled children. So I think what we've got here is a really interesting set of buildings that enhance the architectural offer that Bath as a whole has. But I think with this scheme, I think what we've got is something that's just is too large for the back, and I reach a different conclusion from our officer on this one. I think it's inappropriate by means of its size and its impact on the neighbours, and so therefore I would like to move refusal.
Okay, so that's a move to refuse. Councillor Hodge?
I'm happy to second that motion.
You want to second that. Does anybody else want to make any points? Councillor Warren?
Yeah, I've been listening to the conversation, quite interesting actually. And originally I had quite a lot of issues with this. However, the reality is, if you can build it anyway, or build very close to it anyway, I think I'd have a job to refuse it, to be honest with you.
Councillor Hodge? Sorry, did you say anything else? No?
I suppose the only thing I would say is I think even a 0.8 of a metre makes quite a difference in terms of the impact on neighbours.
Sorry. Sure. Chris, you want to just comment on this?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight to the committee, I mean, just listening to the debate, there's been discussion really about amenity and impact on neighbours and so on. So I just wanted to highlight the policy that committee need to look at really is policy D6, which deals with amenity. And I just want to highlight that policy D6 doesn't say that there can't be any impact on neighbours, and it doesn't even say that there can't be harmful impact on neighbours. What it says is that development shouldn't cause significant harm to the amenity of existing or proposed occupiers by loss of light, increased noise, etc., etc. So the question really is not whether there's harm, but whether that harm is significant. So whether it will significantly harm the amenity of neighbouring residents. And I think that's just something for the committee to have in mind when they decide whether this is contrary to policy or not.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, we've still got a motion on the table. My views on this are that obviously we wouldn't be discussing this had the applicants decided to implement the extension of the permitted development and not go over by that extra 800 well, 0.8 of a metre. They clearly wanted to max out as much as they can without causing any significant harm to neighbours. Obviously, the 45-degree angle demonstrates that it will pay regard to the neighbours' amenity. Obviously, as Councillor Hodge has mentioned, by overshadowing. There will be overshadowing at certain times of the year, certain times of the day, but in my view, I don't think it would be unreasonable for those neighbours. It's an urban development, and as was alluded to before, it's whilst a lot of the garden's been eaten up, it's more of a garden room, isn't it, with the bifolding doors and everything. So whilst it would have been easier to just implement the permitted development, I don't think it's going to cause any substantial harm to the appearance of the building or cause any amenity issues. And obviously, we'll take the votes first of all and decide where we go next. So, Councillor Crossley, you're recommending, you'll put forward a motion to overturn the officer's recommendation, and that's been seconded by Councillor Hodge. So, shall we take a vote? Those in favour? Sorry, do you want to speak before we take the vote?
I mean, I just want to say we could take a personal view about the significance of loss of light at the back of your building. They're small gardens, and reading the comments of the people that live in those houses, the light in those gardens is important. So, I mean, everyone has a different view on it, but I think the loss of light is important.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So those in favour of overturning the officer's recommendation, can you raise your hands? Four, okay. Those against the recommendation? Four again. Okay, that means I've got a carrying vote again, I'm assuming. Okay, so I've just given my views on the proposal. As Vice Chair, I get the carrying vote, so I'm going to overturn the motion that was put forward. So do we want to have any more debate, or will someone like to put forward the motion to support the officer's recommendation? Councillor Warren and Councillor McPhee to second. Okay, those in favour of supporting the recommendation to approve? Four. Those against? Four. Okay, and obviously, you know my view, so I'll be carrying to support the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Subject to the conditions, obviously. Right, okay, thank you for attending the committee. You can stay if you wish to hear about the appeals report. Yeah, I'll just come on to that in a second. So, yeah, can I just ask if anybody's got any questions or comments on the appeals report that we have on the agenda? Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like you to put it on record, please, that Westfield Parish Council are extremely pleased with the outcome of Aviemore, Fossway, Westfield, which they strongly opposed and have done in its previous iterations as well. And having a planning inspector's decision against the development, they think, will perhaps prevent any future problems with this site, which is a problematic site. I mean. But secondly, I'm disappointed about the Magpies decision. I'm afraid I haven't got round to looking at the reasons why the planning inspector allowed this one. This is a Radstock one that I worked on when I was Radstock ward councillor. I was hoping to get into the decisions on that, but I hope this will sort of send up a warning signal that the adjacent plot, which is the land west of Providence Bungalow, which I emailed you about, should come to committee. I think it's just got so sensitive, this area, which was originally designated for employment and now seems to be going to get plastered with houses. So if that could come in for chair's referral, I'd be awfully grateful. Of course, the officer may decide to refuse it anyway.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, thank you for that. So can I just ask that you all note the contents of that report. So finally, next meeting is the 20th of September. I'll be offering my apologies for that, but Councillor Hounsell will be back in the chair again. And obviously we're not doing any site visits, so I'll formally close the meeting. We've just gone over by 20 minutes. Thank you.